All right, let's do this. Deep dive time. Today, it's Moderna's latest quarterly report, the Form 10Q. It covers the period ending September 30, 2024. You know, that's the one with all the financial stuff. It can be a little hard to follow. But don't worry, by the end of this deep dive, we'll all be Moderna experts.
Yeah, this report's really more than just numbers, though. It's a look into how Moderna is changing, like what they're doing beyond COVID-19 and how they're dealing with all the challenges that come up in biotech. It's a fast-moving world out there.
Exactly. It's like we get to peek behind the curtain. We've got news about a second approved product to talk about. There are legal battles brewing about patents, and they even give us a hint about their future vaccine plans. Plus, of course, we'll make those financial statements make sense so everyone can understand what's going on.
You ready to decode Moderna with us?
Absolutely. So first things first, Moderna is moving beyond that COVID company label. They actually have 2WHO commercially approved products now.
That's right.
There's SpikeVax, the COVID-19 vaccine, which everyone knows. But now there's mRESVIA, too, their RSV vaccine. That one's for adults 60 and older.
This is a really big step for Moderna. It shows that they're not just a one-trick pony. They can use their mRNA technology for different diseases, and it's what they've always wanted to do. This is important news for their future, and for anyone who's interested in their stock, too, of course.
Oh, for sure. And about that RSV vaccine, mRESVIA, it's been a real success story so far. They got FDA approval back in May 2024, and sales started in Q3 2024. It's great to see that taking off. Plus, they got that recommendation from the ACP, the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices. That's a pretty big deal, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
That ACP recommendation makes a huge difference. It's like a signal to doctors and other healthcare providers saying, hey, this vaccine is a good idea for your patients. That kind of endorsement can really increase demand. And that, of course, means more revenue for Moderna from mRESVIA.
I see. So that's a big win for them. And there's even more good news about RSV. Their phase 3 trials for a new version of the vaccine had positive results. This one targets high-risk adults, people between 18 and 59 years old. So it sounds like another approval could be coming soon.
Yeah, you're right. They could have another approval very soon. Moderna's really tackling those respiratory viruses head-on. It could make them a leader in the vaccine space, even beyond COVID-19.
It's amazing to see what they're accomplishing. Okay, so let's switch gears a bit and talk about COVID-19. Obviously, it's not a pandemic anymore, but, the virus is still circulating, so it's become more of a seasonal issue, like the flu.
Right, and that shift from pandemic to seasonal has had a direct impact on Moderna. Remember how they switched from those big government contracts to commercial sales in the U.S.? That happened back in Q3 2023.
Yeah, I remember that. Lots of news about it.
Well, that change affects how they record their revenue. Now they have to make estimates for things like returns and discounts they might offer to buyers. And that explains why their sales are looking more seasonal now. It makes sense when you think about it.
I see. So let's take a look at the financials for a minute. Moderna's net product sales for Q3 2024 were $1.8 billion, which is basically the same as Q3 2023. But there's a little more to the story here.
There's always a little more to the story when it comes to financials. What is it this time?
Okay, so there's a $140 million adjustment for Q3 2024, and that's because they had to adjust some of their estimates. It turns out they were a little too careful with their initial predictions about things like product returns.
Well, that makes sense.
Estimating those future returns can be tricky. It looks like Moderna might have played it a little safe at first.
Yeah, it's tough to get those numbers just right. But it's interesting that while their overall revenue stayed about the same, their cost of sales actually dropped a lot in 2024. That's partly because of that cost-cutting program they started in Q3 2023, right? Remember that. Those proactive steps they took to save money are paying off now. They saw the way things were going with the changing COVID-19 market and adjusted accordingly. Good planning.
Exactly. And the bottom line, even with the slightly lower revenue, their earnings per share actually swung from a loss.
Yeah.
In Q3 2023, it was $9.53, but in Q3 2024, they had a profit of 0.03 cents. That's a pretty impressive change.
Definitely impressive.
Yeah.
It really shows how important it is to look beyond just the total revenue. It's the profitability that matters in the end. And Moderna's cost management has put them back in the black. Investors love to see that kind of turnaround.
Okay, time for the fun part. At least I think it's the fun part. Let's talk about Moderna's pipeline. It is packed with potential, seriously. They have 45 development programs, 36 development candidates, and 42 of those are currently in clinical studies. That's a lot of science happening.
It really shows you how dedicated they are to research and development. But here's something interesting. They actually stopped 5 programs this quarter.
Wait, stopped. Is that a bad thing? Does that mean they're giving up?
Not really. In biotech, sometimes stopping a program just means they're focusing their efforts. It shows that Moderna is being strategic with where they put their resources,
Mm.
making sure they have the biggest impact.
Ah, so they're cutting their losses and focusing on the things that could be really big.
Exactly. And speaking of potential big winners, how about we give our listeners a preview of some of the programs that are still going strong?
Ooh, I like that. What have they got brewing in the lab?
Well, for one, there's their next-generation COVID-19 vaccine, mRNA 1283.
Huh?
They expect to file for approval in 2024. That could really make them the leader in the COVID-19 vaccine market.
That's huge. Then there's the combo vaccine, right? The flu and COVID one. mRNA 1083. They're hoping to file for that one too in 2024. But it depends on what the FDA says.
Right. It's not guaranteed yet.
That combo vaccine could really change things,
Yeah.
Especially with flu season coming up. What do you think? Any chance the FDA will fast track that approval?
That's a good question. It's hard to say for sure, but given how important it could be for public health, it's definitely possible they'll move quickly on it.
Yeah, we can hope. What else is interesting to you?
I'm keeping my eye on their CMV vaccine, mRNA 1647. That one is in phase 3 trials now. We should get the first interim analysis by the end of the year, 2024.
CMV is a common virus, but a lot of people don't know about it. It can cause some serious problems, especially for pregnant women and people with weak immune systems. A vaccine for that would be a big deal for a lot of people.
Absolutely. Oh, and I almost forgot. They've got that norovirus vaccine too, mRNA 1403. It's already in phase 3 trials, and the initial results are looking promising.
Norovirus, the dreaded stomach bug, especially on cruise ships. The vaccine for that would be amazing. So many people would be relieved.
For sure. So you can see that Moderna's pipeline is a mix of projects that could pay off soon and some that are more long-term. It'll be really interesting to see how these programs develop in the coming months and years.
It sounds like Moderna's playing a high-stakes game. Scientific chess, with big moves and calculated risks. Speaking of risks, we should talk about those legal battles, shouldn't we? Those lawsuits from GSK and Northwestern University are pretty serious stuff. They could really impact Moderna's future, couldn't they?
They could, yeah. But, it's kind of interesting why these patent disputes are so common in the biotech world.
I was just thinking that. It seems like there's always news about one company suing another one.
Well, in biotech, intellectual property is incredibly important. It's what sets these companies apart. It's how they make back all the money they invested in research and development. And patents protect those investments. So when someone feels like their patents are being infringed on, things can get a little tense.
I see. So these lawsuits are basically about protecting investments and potentially getting a piece of what could be a very profitable market.
Exactly. And in the case of Moderna's COVID-19 and RSV vaccines, we're talking about a really big market, billions and billions of dollars.
Wow. No wonder things are getting a little messy. It sounds like Moderna's fighting on multiple fronts. They're trying to innovate, dealing with lawsuits, and on top of all of that, they have to figure out where to prioritize their resources.
It's true. Prioritizing resources is always a challenge.
Mm.
With so many projects in their pipeline and those legal battles going on, they have to make some tough choices about where to put their time, their money, and their energy.
Yeah, that's a good point. They're kind of playing strategic chess. They have to anticipate their opponent's moves while also planning their own.
That's a great analogy. And that's where strong leadership and a clear vision are really important. Moderna has to figure out which projects have the best chance of success, both scientifically and commercially, and then focus on those.
I see. But how do they make those decisions? It can't be easy to predict which scientific projects will actually work out, can it?
It's definitely a challenge. They use a combination of science, market research, and I think a little bit of intuition, too. They have to think about things like the unmet medical needs, how big the market could be, who they're competing with, and of course the science itself, whether it's even possible.
So it's not just about picking the most exciting or cutting-edge science. They have to find that balance between scientific potential and actually making a product people will use.
Yes, that's exactly right. And that's why those discontinued programs are so interesting. They show that Moderna is making deliberate choices to focus on the projects that are most likely to succeed.
So those discontinued programs aren't really failures, are they? It's more like Moderna's strategy is changing as they learn more.
I like how you put that. They're always assessing their options, making adjustments based on new information and what's happening in the market. It's very dynamic.
It's all very fascinating, I have to admit. It makes you wonder what the long-term impact of all these decisions will be. It seems like Moderna is at kind of a crossroads.
Yeah, they are at a pivotal moment, that's for sure. They've shown they can innovate and make a lot of money, but now they have to navigate this more complex world. They're dealing with commercialization, fierce competition, and all these legal challenges.
It's like they climbed one mountain and now they see a whole mountain range ahead of them.
I like that. Their success is going to depend on how well they can adapt, prioritize, and execute their strategy. It's a fascinating challenge and one that we'll continue to explore in part 2 of this deep dive. It's really amazing, isn't it? I mean, to think that Moderna has gone from being mostly a research company to one making tons of money in such a short time. We're talking just a few years.
Yeah, it's true. It really shows you how powerful this mRNA technology is. But it's not just about science, is it? As we've seen, success in biotech means understanding finance and those legal battles, too. It's a lot to juggle.
You're right, it's not just about the science. And that's what makes Moderna so interesting right now. Let's dig a little deeper into their feat. Form pin Q, okay? I think there are some key takeaways that we should highlight. Things that maybe aren't obvious at first glance.
Okay, I'm ready. Where do we start?
Let's go back to that shift away from government contracts. When they moved to commercial sales for the COVID-19 vaccine in the U.S., that change has big implications for their revenue and how their business works overall.
We did touch on it before, but can you explain that a little more? For our listeners who might not be familiar with all the details, what's the real difference between selling to the government and selling to, well, everyone else?
Well, with government contracts, it's pretty straightforward. Moderna delivers the vaccines and they get paid. Done. Easy revenue. But with commercial sales, it's not that simple. They have to account for things like returns, rebates, and discounts, things they might offer to different buyers, like hospitals or pharmacies. It gets more complicated.
So it's not just about getting those vaccines out the door. Now they have to sort of guess about how much money they'll actually keep.
Exactly. It's all about estimates. And that's why we saw that $140 million adjustment in Q3 2024, remember. It shows just how hard it can be to get those estimates right. The market's always changing, especially as we move from a pandemic to a more seasonal situation. Forecasting those sales gets tricky.
I see. It makes you realize that the numbers in those reports aren't always as clear-cut as they seem, doesn't it? There's a lot of, well, human judgment involved.
You got it. It's not just about plugging in numbers. It's important to look beyond just the raw numbers, to try to understand the story they're telling us. And in Moderna's case, it's a story of adaptation. They're learning as they go, adjusting, and changing their strategy to fit the situation.
Like a ship navigating through uncharted waters.
Exactly. And speaking of navigating, what about those legal battles? The lawsuits from GSK and Northwestern University. Those are serious. They could have a huge impact on Moderna.
They could, yeah. But I have a question, kind of a basic one maybe. Why are patent disputes so common in the biotech industry? It seems like we hear about lawsuits all the time.
Good question. Well, in biotech, intellectual property is everything. It's what gives companies an advantage.
Hmm.
It's how they make back the money they spent on research and development, which is a lot. And patents are there to protect those investments. So when someone feels like their patent has been infringed, well, things can get pretty heated.
So these lawsuits are really about protecting those investments and maybe about getting a piece of what could be a very profitable market.
Exactly. And with Moderna's vaccines, the COVID-19 and the RSV ones, we're talking about a huge market, billions of dollars.
Wow, billions. No wonder things are getting intense.
Hmm.
Moderna's fighting battles on multiple fronts. They have to innovate, they have to deal with these lawsuits, and then they have to decide how to prioritize their resources, too. There's only so much they can do.
It's a lot to manage, for sure. You're right, they have to make tough decisions about where to put their time, their money, and their energy, especially with such a big, ambitious pipeline.
It's like that chess game again.
You're right. They need a clear vision. They have to figure out which projects have the best chance of success, both in the lab and in the market. And then they need to put their energy into those.
I see. Focus is key. But how do they even make those decisions? I mean, it's got to be hard to predict which research projects will be successful.
It is, you're right, it's tough. They use science, of course, market analysis too. And I think, maybe a little bit of gut feeling. They have to consider how much of a need there is for a treatment, how big the market could be, who they're competing with, and then there's the science itself. Is it even possible to do what they're trying to do?
So it's not just about picking the coolest, most cutting-edge science. It's about finding that balance between scientific potential and making sure they're developing a product people will actually use.
Exactly. It has to make sense from a business perspective, too. And that's what's interesting about those discontinued programs, right? Those were deliberate choices. They decided to stop those projects and focus on something else.
So maybe those aren't failures, really. It's more like their strategy is evolving as they learn more about the science and the market.
That's a great way to put it. They're constantly evaluating their options, making changes based on new data and the market. It's very, well, dynamic.
It makes you wonder, though, what's the long-term impact of these decisions? It seems like Moderna's at a crossroads.
They are, definitely. They've shown they can innovate and make money, but now they have to deal with this more complicated reality. Commercialization, competition, lawsuits. It's a lot.
It's like they climbed one mountain and now there's a whole mountain range ahead of them.
Haha, that's a great way to put it. Their success is going to come down to how well they can adapt, prioritize, and actually put their strategy into action. It's a fascinating situation, and we'll keep talking about it in part 3 of this deep dive.
All right, so we've covered a ton of information. Moderna's financials, their big plans for the future, and those legal challenges they're facing. But I think for this last part, we should zoom out a little. Look at the bigger picture. What about the stuff Moderna can't control? Those external factors that could really impact them.
That's a really important point. It's like they're sailing a ship, right? They can control the sails, they can steer, but they can't control the wind or the waves. One of the big things they have to deal with is regulation. The rules around mRNA vaccines and therapies are always changing.
True. The FDA, for example, they have a lot of power, right?
Right.
They decide which products get approved, how they're used. That ultimately impacts how successful a company is.
Absolutely. And mRNA technology is still pretty new, so regulators are always catching up. They update guidelines, change requirements. Moderna has to stay ahead of that curve. They have to make sure their products are meeting the latest safety and effectiveness standards.
It's like running a marathon where the finish line keeps moving.
I like that. And then there's the competition. The biotech industry is tough, tons of companies all trying to get a piece of the market.
It's a race to the top. Everyone wants to develop the next big therapy or vaccine.
You got it. And Moderna's not just competing with the big guys like GSK. There are smaller companies too, and they can be really innovative. Moderna can't just sit back and relax. They have to keep pushing.
Right. They can't just rely on their past successes. Innovation is key.
Exactly. Oh, and we can't forget about public perception. mRNA vaccines were kind of new to a lot of people during the pandemic.
Yeah.
And while they've been really effective, some people are still hesitant. There's a lot of misinformation out there.
That's true. Trust is important for any healthcare company. But for Moderna, it's even more crucial because mRNA technology is still relatively new.
I agree. They have to address concerns, communicate clearly, and really prove that their products are safe and work well. Oh, and here's another thing that's important. Global health equity.
So you're talking about making sure everyone has access to these vaccines and therapies, no matter where they live or how much money they have.
That's it. And it's not just the right thing to do, it's smart business too. If Moderna expands into global markets, it could really boost their impact and reach a lot more people.
It's a win-win. Good for global health, good for their business. Okay, so we've talked about a lot of stuff. Let's bring it all together. What does all of this mean for Moderna going forward?
Well, like any biotech company, there are definitely opportunities and challenges. They have a lot of potential, but it's going to depend on a few key things.
Okay, what should we be paying attention to?
Innovation is number one. They have to keep developing new products, expanding their pipeline. The science is always moving forward. They can't fall behind.
So basically, they have to anticipate what healthcare will need in the future.
Yep, that's a big part of it. And regulations. They need to be smart about navigating those. They have to work with agencies like the FDA, build relationships, understand what's expected of them.
Be a good partner.
That's right. And money. They have to manage their finances well, invest in research and development, make sure they're bringing in revenue, make sure they're profitable. It's a tough balance.
They can't just spend money on everything. They have to make smart choices about where to invest.
Exactly. And last but not least, that public trust. It's crucial. They have to be transparent about their work, explain things clearly, and address any concerns.
They have to be a company that people can trust.
You got it. If Moderna can handle all of that, they could become a major force in healthcare. They could really change the way we prevent and treat diseases.
That's an exciting thought, but it comes with a lot of responsibility. So here's a question for our listeners, something to think about as we wrap up this deep dive. Given everything we've learned about Moderna, their ambition, their scientific expertise, and the challenges they face, How do you think they'll decide to use their resources in the coming years? Will they focus on what they're already doing, or will they tackle new diseases? Maybe they'll form partnerships to help them grow faster. The answer to that question will not only shape Moderna's future, but it could shape the future of mRNA technology itself. And that technology has the potential to change healthcare as we know it. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll see you next time.